Marjorie Taylor Greene has dropped bombshell legislation to ban medical gender transition of minors across the U.S. I think we can just say, I'm actually surprised Post Millennial didn't just say child sex changes, because gender transition is the softening of the language. I'm going to say this before we get into this story. I don't understand why people, I mean, I do understand, but there are so many political ideologies that refuse to just say what they support. Like, I've talked to racist people and they talk about how racist they are. And then I'm like, so you're a racist? And they're like, no, it's not that. And I'm like, dude, if you're going to say these things, why don't you just own it? Just be like, yeah, of course. That's it, right? But anyway, not to rag on the post-millennial, Libby, we're big fans. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is taking aim at the trans craze sweeping the nation with a new bill that seeks to criminalize the medicalized gender transition of minors. The Protect Children's Innocent Act would outright ban and prohibit all so-called gender affirmative care for minors in the U.S. and offer civil protections to any minor upon whom these procedures were done. Now, that last part is very, very important. There are many detransitioners. There is a subreddit with nearly 40,000 people subscribed to it. All posts talking about how they regret transitioning, how it ruined their lives, and it is terrifying. And I feel so bad for mostly these young women because their bodies are irreparably harmed. There was the Boston Children's Hospital is big in the news right now because they do gender affirming surgeries, they call it. And you have to wonder why it is they call it that instead of just saying sex change surgeries. I don't know. I think they're trying to soften, they call it gender affirming healthcare or gender affirming care, because I think if they went to parents and said sex change surgery for children, the parents would be like, wait a minute. Okay, what is going on? So there are many detransitioners, and these civil protections, I'm imagining, will offer them up some recourse later in life when, because I don't believe that every single trans kid is going to regret it. I do believe that there needs to be safeguards, but there's going to be a lot of detransitioners. They're going to say it was wrong. I don't want to live this way. I was a child. I could not consent to this. And then this is actually the path towards stopping child sex change surgery, in my opinion. If you simply say something like this, give the kids the treatment, the families can decide for their children, but rest assured, children can't consent. And if you do perform this, you will be liable if these children take issue. One notable issue here is hysterectomy. There are many doctors who refuse to perform hysterectomies on adult women. There was one story we talked about where an adult woman was like, I wanted a hysterectomy, and the doctor would not give it to me. Or she wanted her tubes tied, and she said, why won't the doctor do this procedure? Simple. When you are in your early 20s, when you are, worse still, when you're a child, prepubescent, and you request body-altering surgery that can never be reversed, then that doctor is going to face the ramifications of performing these procedures. That's why they don't do hysterectomies. Some do, a lot do, but there are a lot of doctors who won't because they're like, dude, you're going to come back here in 10 years and you are going to be screaming at me for having done this. Sorry. There are just doctors who are like, I do not want to remove a healthy organ for, personal choice reasons because I don't want to be responsible or liable when you come back later and say that you were misled. Not doing it. So here's what they say. Greene provided the legislation exclusively to the post-millennial. The bill is co-sponsored by Mary Miller, Jeff Duncan, Bob Good, Matt Gaetz, Ralph Norman, and Tony Gonzalez. Of those in the GOP who do not back the bill or who acquiesce to medical gender transition of minors, Greene says they're worthless. In June, some GOP lawmakers broached the Protecting Minors from Medical Malpractice Act so that minors could sue those doctors that harmed them through gender affirmative care. Right now in Scandinavian countries and in the UK, they're ending all of this and they're moving towards psychotherapy to try and help people because the concern is, and I know most of you know this, but for those that don't, the concern is that these kids will take their own lives, that suicidal ideation will become more pronounced, and that's the risk, and that if they perform gender-affirming care early on, it could prevent this. That's the argument. The problem is when you look at the detransitioner forums, you see that among many of these people, it's actually gotten worse. If someone is suffering through a depressive state, and then you offer them up a body-altering, life-altering surgery, hoping to alleviate that, if you are wrong, you will make the problem worse. That's why we have to be so careful to make sure we are trying to protect the lives of these individuals who are suffering through this. Now, there are a lot of activists that say this is the right thing to do to save their lives. And my position on this is, I hope you are correct, because when you look at the Detransitioner Forum, how many of these people have you condemned? How many of them have you harmed? If we're trying to save lives, we have to be very, very careful here. They say, the bill would make pharmaceutical gender affirmation of minors a Class C felony, punishable by up to 25 years in prison and a $250,000 fine, and stop any taxpayer-funded insurance plans from paying for this kind of treatment. The law would bar any school from providing instruction on those practices. In the event that a foreign national is found to have carried out the medical gender transition of a minor, they will be ineligible to receive visas or be admitted into the United States. The bill clearly lays out that no minor who underwent surgeries or pharmaceutical intervention for the purpose of gender transition would be held liable, instead saying the minor would have recourse against each person who performed the gender-affirming care. Now I'll pause and just say, I don't see this bill passing at all. And even if they hold it till November, if it doesn't make it to a floor vote or something till November, and the Republicans end up winning, and then come January, there's an opportunity to actually vote on it, it could pass in the House and the Senate, and it's not going to get a veto-proof majority. The Democrats they're not going to overcome the filibuster. Republicans likely will not do away with the filibuster. We'll see. And then even if it does, Joe Biden will just veto it. It's not going to happen. Maybe in 2025, when Donald Trump reassumes the presidency, he would sign something like this, assuming he wins. Maybe it'll be Ron DeSantis. If Ron DeSantis does win, he will sign this. I genuinely 100% believe Ron DeSantis would sign this without hesitation, because we're already seeing he's put out this, anti-woke stuff. He's got a new plan for his reelection campaign. He's put out his priorities, his playbook, as they call it. And he talks about protecting these kids, right? They say the bill clearly lays out the minors would not be held responsible. That which characterizes what is known as gender affirming care includes dozens of procedures as well as the application of drugs that would be prohibited under the bill. That the procedures and drugs are laid bare shows the scope of what kind of butchery is considered justifiable under the cause of trans care. These include castration, orchiectomy, scotoplasty, vasectomy, hysterectomy, oophorectomy, ovariectomy. I think the oophorectomy, is that the ovaries? Is it ovariectomy? Oh. Metoidoplasty, penectomy, phalloplasty, vaginectomy, vulvoplasty, reduction. Well, I'm not going to read all. You get it. Cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers are also prohibited for purpose of gender affirmation or curing gender dysphoria. Green spoke to the Post Millennium about her plans to bring a bill of this kind before to the House, saying this is child abuse and it should be completely illegal. And anyone that performs those therapies or those surgeries, they should be in jail. A Republican majority is completely worthless if we are not standing up and stopping this, Green said to the Post Millennial. The Republican Party needs to be the party that protects children, stops puberty blockers, hormone therapy, genital mutilation surgery of anyone under 18 before they're old enough to actually make that decision. Now, that's where it gets really interesting. My question for Marjorie Taylor Greene, for any of these conservatives, for one, I personally don't think we should be having child sex change surgery. That's just my personal opinion. But I also have recognized that there is an issue with where's the line in saying the government should intervene in stopping or mandating medical treatment for children. If the argument is that children have to be at least 18 before they can consent to this, well, parents can consent in many ways for a lot of what their kids do. This is considered medical treatment. That's the argument right there. If the parents are told by a doctor your child needs this treatment, and the parents say, okay, please save my child because there's concerns, then who is the government to intervene? That being said, the proper counter argument is children cannot consent to sex, and a parent cannot consent for them, period. We recognize there are limitations in what parents can do to a human being, even if that person is their child. In this case, I think what we're seeing in the gold standard of countries with medical care, such as Sweden and Finland, and of course the UK with their NHS, the gold standard, so saith the left. Well, they're rejecting all of this. They found that puberty blockers are causing irreparable harm to these children. Look, I go where the science goes. I think there is a serious concern about children receiving irreversible surgeries because we've seen the detransitioners. We've seen the pain and suffering that these people are going through because of this, because they could not consent. And now there's a hard question. Personally, I do believe there are transgender children. And I actually, let me show you this from Psychology Today. And I have some evidence to back up the claim that there are children who are dysphoric, who have masculinized brains, and probably would be at risk of suicidal ideation and self-harm unless they do receive affirmation treatments. But my issue for the most part is I don't think that's the majority or the overwhelming. I think mostly what they're doing to young girls is you have young girls going through puberty, a difficult time. I'm not a girl. I wouldn't know, but I know the opinions of older women who have talked about it. When a boy goes through puberty, what happens? They're talking and then their voice goes like that a little bit. That's it. And then one day they're like, guys, you want to go play basketball? Their voice drops. Things like that. For women, they're developing visibly in front of all of their peers. And there's, of course, the menstrual cycle, which is a very serious disruption and painful circumstance for many young girls. So what we've heard from many adult human females, just literally talking about their puberty, they did not like the changes and they said they didn't want to be a woman. I've heard this from so many different articles from women saying they didn't want to go through these changes, and they said, why couldn't they just be a boy instead? I think what's happening is there are a lot of young girls who are just going through these changes and they're not getting strong parental leadership to tell them it's okay. This is who you are and this is what you will be. It's not bad. Instead, when these young girls say, I don't like these changes, then the parents say, are you trans? Their peers say, are you trans? And that's why at the Boston Children's Hospital, we're seeing 90% of their surgeries are double mastectomies. And on average, the girls are like 15 or 16 years old. That's terrifying. But here's my point. Gender dysphoria literally does exist. And I think we have to be careful about this. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I completely understand. We need to find a way to make sure you are not incorrectly giving surgeries to or hormonal therapies to children. For me, I will say outright, again, I completely oppose it. I think you got to be 18. I do. Children cannot consent to sex, and I don't think they can consent to this, even though I do recognize gender dysphoria is real. Take a look at this. Psychology Today, November 13th, 2019. This is Nigel Barber, PhD, writing Gender Fluidity and Hormone Disruptors, and he makes note of something very, very important. He mentions, recent evidence indicates that phthalates from plastic and polychlorinated biphenyls are one of many factors predicting gender dysphoria, particularly in cases of male to female transgenders. The issue here is whether it is hormone disruptors, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals, we recognize it is having an impact on fetuses and babies and then causing gender dysphoria, this dissociative, feeling people have, identity crises. And we want to make sure these people are okay, can still live. Thalidomide. Are you familiar with this? It was prescribed to women as an anti-nausea medicine a long time ago. And it deformed their children, their babies. The babies were born with no arms. They had like hands and they were malformed. We want those babies to live happy lives. We don't blame them for the chemicals that the parents took in good faith. But we recognize we made a mistake there. Human civilization, America, thalidomide was bad. We didn't know it was going to do this. It did it. That's a problem. Nigel writes, another candidate is pharmaceuticals. This phenomenon emerged in connection with the contraceptive drug diethylstilbestrol. Mothers who were unaware of their pregnancy continued to take the drug. It was found to have masculinizing effects on the brains of female fetuses. The limited evidence available indicated that when they matured, such females were less interested in caring for children and more interested in female romantic partners. There's going to be chemicals in our food supply, these PCBs, pharmaceuticals, phthalates, etc., and it's going to result in transgender children. I think the evidence is here. At least I defer to the PhDs. How do we solve for this problem? One, I think we need to target the root. If PCBs and these drugs are shown to do this, we need to stop their use. Yeah, but people, they don't want to give up their plastic water bottles. They don't want to give up the convenience of their plastic-wrapped foods. Plastic is, I should be honest, it is a revolutionary. You need to vacuum seal products to preserve them. So I got plastic-sealed bacon. Who doesn't? But these PCBs leach into your food and have dysphoric effects on children. So what do? I don't think giving children sex change surgeries is the right answer for one reason. While I can recognize, as per this PhD, there's hormonal disruptors. Even Alex Jones talked about this with atrazine all those years ago. I recognize that. And I recognize this means there will be children who have masculinized brains, females, and they're going to be unhappy and they're going to feel gender dysphoria. I don't want them to suffer, and I want them to live strong and healthy lives, and we want to protect them. But there's also the risk of giving irreversible surgeries to children who are not suffering from masculinized brains or gender dysphoria, but they don't know because we're seeing children rushed through the process. We got to make sure we do this properly. We had Helena Kirshner on, she on Timcast IRL, and she said that she walked into Planned Parenthood and they just gave her testosterone. And it was wrong, and she regretted it. She talks about how she was groomed online, that people kept telling her how cool she looked when she kept masculinizing her appearance. And that is not gender dysphoria. That is grooming. And that's why she came out later and said, that's wrong. I didn't want that. I didn't feel like people were just egging her on. But there are people who are transgender. And this is the thing, Matt Walsh is very, very strict on this. He says no. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're all very, very strict on it. I don't think I go as strict as they do. They view it more as like willful evil. And I certainly believe there is a large component of that. But my issue is read the research here and recognize, regardless of your view on how these surgeries are performed, regardless of whether or not you think they're good or evil or otherwise, we need to address the problems of hormone disruptors in our food supply, in our drinking water, etc. We've known for a long time that molecules from birth control was getting into drinking water. At least that was the narrative. And it wasn't able to be filtered out. And then people are drinking it, and that's feminizing. Diethylstilbestrol. That's a mouthful, right? It was having masculinizing effects on female fetuses. What about male fetuses? Alex Jones talked about atrazine, an endocrine disruptor that was in water supplies, and it was turning the frickin' frogs gay. It wasn't. It was. I think he actually he mentions this in the articles. He said polluted ponds could turn male frogs into females. Interestingly, some of the affected frogs were capable of reproducing, but produced all male offspring that had the effect of crashing the population. This is where I think we need to start focusing all of this conversation. The left wants to treat a symptom. Why are we seeing gender dysphoria in children? There's two factors. One, hormone disruptors, as per Nigel Barber, PhD, and social contagion. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know which one is more than the other. But if you're giving surgeries based on a social pressure, then you are causing irreparable harm to children, and you will increase suicidal ideation and suicide. That is not good. In the end, man, I want to see people live long, happy lives. I don't want to see people hurt or harmed. But the end result is going to be kids who are sterilized and not having children. So I don't know. If we don't address things like this, we're never going to actually solve the problem, and we're only going to breed more suffering. So I actually would lean in favor of Marjorie Taylor Greene's proposed bill. And I've always been concerned about this because when they do the gender transition surgeries and medical treatment for, kids who are under 12 or 13, I'm like, that's shocking and terrifying. And they've done it. I mean, Jazz Jennings quite literally was put on puberty blockers. Puberty blockers cause advanced osteoporosis and other issues. That's horrifying to me. But then you get to the point where you have 16, 17-year-olds who really are at risk for suicide. And then you say people saying they're going to ban this. And I'm like, well, these are people who are post-puberty, still adolescent. And there are questions about when do we allow it? Man, I'd say 18. You have to be a legal adult who could enter into a legal contract. Children can't consent to sex. And I don't see them being able to do it here. It's, you know what, man? It's frustrating that there's only really one or the other. I think for the most part, the right is more willing to address these issues and have a conversation about it, as per the obvious that we have conversations about it. The left is unwilling. Right now, there are activist groups arguing that children should be taken from their parents unless they give the surgery and medication to the child. Not kidding. See, that's psychotic. And that's where we're going. Man, these moral issues, they're never easy. They aren't. You know, if you're trying to protect lives, the right is obviously arguing that these kids, they're being misled. But it is true that there are people who don't desist. While we've seen studies saying that desistance is something like, 68 to 90 some odd percent, meaning these kids who say they're trans ultimately after puberty will say they're not. We've seen that the overwhelming majority. There still is that 30 to 10 to 30% that don't. And can we provide some treatment or therapy for them to protect them as well? I'm not a psychic. I don't have all the answers. I'm not the arbiter of morality. Marjorie Taylor Greene has proposed this. I'd be more in favor of it because I think non-intervention is better than intervention when you don't know. The argument from the left is that, but then they'll go through puberty. And it's like, but that's who they are. I understand it may be an issue for 10 to 30% of these kids growing up. But at 18, they have a right to their body and they can make better decisions. Matt Walsh takes it one step further, says no one should ever be allowed to do this. And there's an interesting argument to be made about amputation or surgeries on healthy body parts. If somebody was body dysmorphic because they were, anorexic, should we give them a liposuction? If someone thought their hand was foreign to their body, should we remove it? Tough questions, man. But I think for the most part, we just say no. We'll see how this plays out. I don't think this is going to get past Biden, so we'll need a Republican victory to see this move forward. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.